just want you to know I practiced this word about 20 times to make sure that I did not mispronounce it.
I have a question. Has anyone ever said with all due respect and then not followed up with a zinger?
His side of the bed. If I come in and I'm on the other side, he will move it. Yeah, that's it.
Which side do you like? With all due respect, you make a good point.
Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Mute. He's muted.
I love what he's saying. He doesn't need sounds.
You're so small, squishing your head, Joseph.
You can.
Do it with me, Joe.
With all due respect, you really do look handsome, Bruce. Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Look at you. You are insane.
How did I do that?
How did I do
that? You just made the intro reel. Yes, you did.
You're insane.
That's how you know you have arrived in life, when you have made the intro reel. So right now, David Burkus is thinking, what crazy task can I perform? What insane thing can I do to make the intro reel? I'm sure he will just naturally make the intro reel by being awesome and sharing pearls of wisdom. As you can see, it's all about leading from anywhere. And right now, we could be anywhere because we are all living in this weird, remote, virtual purgatory limbo of this life that we call business as unusual. So today is Get Out Your Guitar Day. It's February 11th. Get Out Your Guitar Day. How could anything go wrong now that I have a guitar with me and you can see the ring light maybe in the guitar. Let's see if I can get the ring light into it's like a game. I can't figure out how to get it into the hole. But now I've got to figure out what the hell to do with the guitar. So it's just going to have to sit on my lap, and occasionally you'll just hear silly things like that on my left-handed guitar, which I don't really know how to use very well. But there you have it. Now I've got to figure out how to change everything while the guitar sits on my lap. I'm expecting it to fall. Oh yes, it is going to fall today. Let's change the background, shall we, and make this everything David Burkus. I love that. Let's do that exactly. So David Burkus is a keynote speaker. He is a multiple best-selling author. He just wrote a book called Leading from Anywhere. And this book did not exist about 11 months ago. So I think it's unusual. It's not unusual. It's incredible. It's exceptional. The word, accept comes from exceptional. When someone can actually conceive of an idea and write it and publish it within 8 months. And certainly a book that needed to be written right now, because people are really struggling and suffering from Zoom fatigue and trying to deal with this new normal, and recognizing, of course, that some of these things are going to stay around when we go back to normal as well. We're going to be doing a little experiment today. We're going to be doing the after show in Clubhouse. So for those of you that have figured out Clubhouse, well done. Please tell me what the hell's going on, because I'm trying to figure it out myself. Just kidding. Been having a very interesting time in Clubhouse. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to post or paste the link into the comments. So if you'd like to come and join David and myself for 30 minutes right after the show, please do that. We would love that as well. Tom Morris says, get out your guitar day. Yeah, man. And Bowman is here. We could see the ring light. I know you could. And Manif said, happy Inventors Day, by the way. Maybe I should have chosen Inventors Day because it would have been a little bit easier than now having to lug this massive guitar around, or at least keep it on my lap. Tomorrow, a little change. Jeremy Tucker from Planet Fitness, unfortunately, will not be joining us, but he sends his apologies. He will be back. Justin Levy will be, the Spartan man, will be joining David, Peter, Sharon, and Lee on a health and wellness, mental health, physical health, fitness themed community show tomorrow. I cannot wait. Let's do birthdays. Claudia Capiluto, Marcus, Steve Sermon. I haven't seen Steve in so long. Johnny Sacchi, the legendary Johnny Sacchi. Jennifer Aniston, my good friend Jennifer Aniston. But most importantly, Auntie Charlene Perkins and my brother-in-law Stuart Stone, two absolute rocks in our family, in our community, in our lives, my wife and my life, my kids' life. Happy birthday, Stewie, and happy birthday, Charlene, the matriarch of our a transplanted family here in Connecticut. And then on LinkedIn, there's Carmen Villader, there is Rupert Morris, James Harris, Richard Locke. Happy birthday to you guys. Well, we'll get into our seated soliloquy in just a moment. But as you can see, that is what's called a nice little wardrobe malfunction. It had to happen. Let's just fix it up a little bit. By the way, David, I didn't have coffee, although I probably should have. Let's figure out how to get back. Nope, that's worse. Let's see how we can make it better. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. We'll just go with this. What the hell? I dressed up for David. I dressed up for you. I just did a 90-minute show for a client, for a corporate client. And I finished it, and 15 minutes later, I'm doing this. So I haven't actually had coffee, although I probably should have. But I'm kind of high. I'm drunk on a job well done, on feeling a sense of fulfillment, on being able to connect with fellow marketers stuck at home, stuck in general, stuck on Zoom. And I really believe, and you saw my soliloquy called The Greatest Zoom on Earth, that everything could be a show. Everything should be a show. Everything, every status meeting, every offsite, every training and development program, everything has the potential to be a show. And I just put on one, and I certainly hope that they liked it. But today we're focusing on an old adage, right, which is there's no I in team. And I'm going to go back and connect with a few previous guests, starting with yesterday. Yesterday on the show, my guest George Tannenbaum said something to the effect of, well, actually, I'll give you his exact words because I pulled a transcript of it. There's no semiotic hierarchy in offices anymore, where there might have been at one time hallways that you were quiet on, or offices that you were afraid to go into. That stuff was important. That stuff was protective. It's gone. You can be typing and people will stand over your shoulder and interrupt you. End quote. It was kind of ironic because the day before, Michael Farmer and I were busy discussing going back to the Mad Men days. Well, today, David Burkus and I are going to be discussing leadership and teams in this remote world that we're living in. Over the past almost year, we've been debating physical or virtual or hybrid workplaces in a post-COVID era, but we actually haven't done the how. We haven't discussed the how, right? The what and maybe the why, but not the how. How do we get the best and most out of individuals and teams? How do we brainstorm? How do we collaborate? How do we joke, kibitz, and cajole? How do we find just the right mix of formality and informality? How do we allow the power of randomness and serendipity to surprise and delight us? How do we motivate and inspire ourselves and others? If Clubhouse, or as it is referred to as drop-in audio, has taught us anything, it's that conference calls are not dead, but rather there is a better way to leverage the power of voice. If Zoom has taught us anything, it's that we need to get off Zoom and get back in the real world. Actually, it's not about technology at all, but rather our ability to get back to the fundamentals, leadership, collaboration, the power of teams. Over the past year, we've all become teams of one, as opposed to one team. We've all been treading water for dear life, call it synchronized swim or sinking. Now it's time to reacquaint ourselves with the dynamic in group dynamic. Just ask Patrick Mahomes if one man maketh a team. The answer is no, unless of course you're Tom Brady, but that's a goat for another day. So let's all shift our focus from what to how as we figure out what comes next or how comes next together. Well, now someone who I could say has literally written the book on it, Mr. David Burkus, and a little bit of background on David for you. One of the world's leading business thinkers, David Burkus's forward-thinking ideas and best-selling books are helping leaders and teams do their best work ever. He is the best-selling author of 4 books about business and leadership. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into dozens of languages. Since 2017, Berkus has been ranked as one of the world's top business thought leaders by Thinkers 50. I'm apparently 51. As a sought-after international speaker, his TED Talk has been viewed over 2 million times. He's worked with leaders from organizations across all industries, including Google, Fidelity, Viacom, and even the US Naval Academy, which I assume knows a thing or two about teams. Let's welcome him on to Corona TV, Mr. David Burkus, the man with the greatest picture ever.
Well, and because of you, I had to put a sport coat on too. I'm actually sitting down here in our basement wearing a hoodie and like fleece pants because it is unseasonably cold here right now. I know it's winter in North America, but we're not supposed to get, I live in Oklahoma. We're not supposed to get winter. We're not supposed to get snow and ice, and we've got it. I feel like I could be in Connecticut. So, you know, since weather-wise, we're suffering through the same thing, I guess we needed a good enough camera for that as well.
It's been interesting because last year we got no snow, and this year it's like every 2 days now we're getting another, I don't know, 3 to 5 inches, and it's actually quite pretty. I like it. It's not like I have anywhere to go, right?
Well, I mean, that's fair. And in a way, winter's sort of a metaphor for what we've gone through for the last year, right? It's just one thing after another, right? It's just snowfall after snowfall after snowfall. So we're like reliving a little 2020 in our February all over again, which I'm sure, you know, no one wants to do, but here we are.
Well, I'm looking at some of the comments, and Anne Bowman also says it's the start of the Chinese New Year. So happy New Year to you. And Tom Morris is going to put on a sport coat in honor of the after show, but since it's on Clubhouse, it would be a silent gesture. But a really concerning comment from Glenn, who says we could listen to Joseph on Clubhouse naked and no one would ever know. My question, even though my mother is actually watching, hopefully she wasn't saying agreed to that comment, but something else is, who is naked on Clubhouse? Is it me or is it you? I don't know.
You might have just started a thing, by the way. You remember when AOL chat rooms came up, right? And then there were some pretty seedy chat rooms on AOL and CompuServe. Naked on Clubhouse may become a thing, and I will blame you entirely when it ruins the platform.
I'm trying to actually set up a club, so I'm going to call it, I imagine no one has applied for the Naked Clubhouse Club yet. So, David, would you like to be the co-chair with me?
No, I would not, actually, if that's okay.
You see, you might have just made the intro because of that. All right, so David, I always like to get to know my guests and find out some fun facts about them. And you know, we send our reporters, our private eyes, our investigators into the field to find out all these little known and embarrassing facts. And here's the first one, which is from now on, I'm going to refer to you as Sir David Burkus because you have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah, it's actually master or professor from the Portuguese, but that's okay. You know, whatever you want to use.
Oh, I will call you Master Professor Sir David Burkus.
You know,
because you could kick my ass.
All right, that's fair. I'm actually surprised that you edited a photo because one of the reasons I got into creating lots and lots of content on YouTube was to drown out content that when it used to be when you searched my name, you could find videos of me losing in national, international competitions. In spectacular fashion. Well, the one with the most views is not about me. It's actually about my opponent, but he beat me in like 44 seconds. So yeah, now everybody's going to go be looking that up on YouTube instead. But I've created hundreds of videos just to try and push that one to the back of the search results just to get over it. So thankfully your private eyes are not that good and they didn't find that video.
Or maybe we did, but we just chose not to show it. But it's interesting because, you know, so many people have struggled with this idea of, you know, how reputation management, right? And how to get rid of that embarrassing video. Some people have had real black marks or stains on their permanent record for sometimes an innocent mistake, other times just a really bad, you know, decision or professional decision in their lives. And it's really hard in this world, you know, where Google doesn't forget to somehow push it down. So I guess now you can hire David Burkus for leadership, for team dynamics and organizational dynamics, and how to and reputation management. How about that?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, again, I'm lucky. My approach is usually just to own it and mention that there's and it's worked out actually. I was on Tom Bilyeu's show a number of years ago, and that's all he wanted to talk about for 30 minutes. Not me losing, but the jiu-jitsu thing. So, it's not worth pushing all of it down. But I do wish the videos of me winning would be more prevalent in the search results.
Well, here's another example of how you've been winning, but in this case, it's what's called a secret win, because it turns out that not only do you have a love for hamburgers, but you have a secret Instagram account dedicated to hamburgers. And I searched for it, but I didn't find it because guess why? It's secret.
It is. Well, the secret is that I run it. I've never actually mentioned. I could tell you, but I have to keep it a secret. But yeah, it's literally just that's probably my ideal food. And actually, even now in a world of like Impossible Burgers, it's not actually about the meat. It's something else. But yeah, it's literally just it's just dedicated to chronicling different burgers that I've had, because when we used to travel. Do you remember that, Joseph? When we used to travel, that was my number one thing. I would fly into a city the day before, try and get in the afternoon, and the only thing I'd be looking up on Yelp is like, okay, I'm in this city. Where is the best place to get a burger? So I finally decided to just start chronicling it. And it's not that, I mean, it's like 500 followers. It's not that big of an account, but it's a lot of fun.
I have loved Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers, and I've become so used to it as well that, I mean, it's been probably the greatest gift to people that don't eat meat. I don't eat meat out, but I do eat meat, but not meat out for kosher reasons. But for me, it's just been, the ability to go and order the equivalent of a cheeseburger. And I got to say, to me, it's the real deal. I don't know how you feel, because you probably love that piece of meat with the cheese and bacon and whatever the case may be.
Yeah, see, okay, so that's the dilemma, right? Is it sort of step one, right? We're getting there with Impossible. Impossible is better than Beyond Meat, by the way. Tom asked, how do I judge them both? I definitely think the Impossible one is better. But I still want bacon. I still want cheese, right? I actually, and maybe this is a factor of where I live, I'm a big fan of the Western style burger, which includes an onion ring and barbecue sauce, right? And so there's a lot of things going on there that are, the burger's just one problem. Everything else needs to be replicated as well. And then there's the other factor, which is they're actually terrible for you. Like in terms, I mean, they're as terrible for you as meat, but then a little more so in terms of the amount of sodium and all of that kind of stuff. But that's also how they got the flavor. So, I guess a give and take.
Hey, listen, I'll take that sodium any day. But now, Steve Garfield, there, you've made him. He's perturbed. He wants to know why it's secret, and why wouldn't you want to share photos of hamburgers? He's really upset about this.
Yeah, I apologize, Steve. If you want to direct message me, I'll tell you. Here's the reason that it's secret. I want it to succeed on its own. It's like an Instagram experiment. If I were also promoting it, then followers of mine, people would start promoting it. And I'd much rather just have nobody know which one it is and let it get to like, 10,000 followers before I'm like, look what we built. And we're not there. The other reason it's secret is that it's a colossal failure. It only has like 500 followers after 3 years of doing it. So, and since the pandemic, eating good photo ready burgers is actually really hard, because the process of having someone deliver them to you or take out and bring them home, they end up looking terrible. So there's a couple reasons, but the biggest is I want to see if I can actually do it without the personal brand, if that makes sense.
All right. So keep us informed. You can, in the interim, follow David on the Insta, but this is not going to get you any closer to the secret burger account, the Cotton Club on Clubhouse. This is the Hamburger Club on Instagram, and you'll just have to watch the space. It's a great experiment, David. And I mean, really, what it comes down to is walking your talk, right? Eating your own impossible dog food. But it's important. And when I joined the conversation, I came up with this concept of UNM to PNM. Use new marketing to prove new marketing, because I feel if we are the so-called experts, we have to be able to market our own books. We have to be able to walk our own talk, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree, and I'm much more. I'm an organizational psychologist by training. I'm much less on the marketing side, but I've always respected like I mean, the pinnacle example when we talk about social media is someone like Gary Vee, right? Who has this massive following. Granted, it's a bunch of sort of 19 to 25-year-old entrepreneurs, but the point is that his company, it becomes head and shoulders above the rest because he can go, look, this thing that I did with my platform, I can do with yours, right? And I think there's a lot, and this is my personal rant as someone who's adjacent to the field of marketing, but not fully in it, is if all you're ever doing is working with clients, are you really actually showing what you can do? Or was it all just a function of how much money they let you waste on ads and that kind of stuff, right? Show me what you can build by yourself, and I'm much more likely to hire you. So not that I'm going into Instagram marketing anytime soon or anything like that. It just decided to be this sort of fun experiment to see if there was some other brand that I could create and get some affinity for.
I love that idea. And in many respects, I'm doing it. Well, we're actually both here today doing it. I'm doing it with respect to Corona TV. You know, I had no business streaming. I'd never streamed anything. Maybe only when I'd gone to the toilet. There was a different kind of a stream or crossing streams or whatever. But I mean,
but I'm sure as you got older, the stream was worse. So, you know,
I mean, worse as yes. There's medication for that. I know. Welcome to the 50s. But that's what I'm doing, right? Which is and not only doing it, but actually being quite self-effacing and sharing the triumphs and the tragedies and putting my head down, keeping going. But here you are, and you've written a book and you've published the book in lightning speed. We'll get to that book. But before we do, I think the bridge from where we are, from Impossible Burgers, streams, and Gardner and Jiu Jitsu to this time, you know, talk a little bit about how you've walked your talk in general in your life, you know, kind of leading up to this crazy time we're living in.
Yeah, I mean, at the core of what I've been trying to do my entire career, I was an undergrad English major. And when I was there studying, I thought I wanted to be a novelist, right? I thought I wanted, the grand dilemma of my 19-year-old existence was, do I want to be Faulkner or do I want to be James Patterson, right? Do I want to be commercial or literary? Do I want to make money or do I want to be respected and then commit suicide like Hemingway, right? Not that I wanted to do that last part ever, right? But that's the grand dilemma. And then in that time, I ended up finding long form journalism, narrative nonfiction, a bunch of other genres, in particular reading from science anthologies like Great American Science Writers, et cetera, and thinking this is fascinating. Like these people are actually, they're using storytelling. They're using all the things that encouraged me to be an undergrad English major, but they're helping people. And it helps that they're not starving as well, right? So I graduated out of that thinking that's what I want to do. I want to write about psychology, help people apply it to their life. I went to graduate school for organizational psychology, got all the way up to a doctorate, mostly because my wife is a real doctor and I've always just been a little competitive. We compete to see who has more pieces of useless paper on the wall. But in general, that became the goal. The through line has always been to blend storytelling and the most recent research in behavioral science to help people live better lives. The real niche focus for me happened a number of years ago when I focused on the experience of work and specifically the experience of teams, right? Because work, even in a remote work environment, it's too central to our lives to suck. It's too central of our lives to be draining. It's 40 plus hours a week of your life. Before the remote great work from home experiment, it was at the core of your life. All the rest of your life fit around the margins. And so to have it be a draining experience was terrifying, right? So I've been working on that ever since. That includes a lot of different experiments in how I work, et cetera. I've actually been working from home remotely through a variety of different project teams for the majority of my career at this point. And so when the opportunity, opportunity feels like a weird way to say it because what actually happened was the world ended. But when the opportunity to present, here's what we know about the research on virtual teams, here's the ability to use some storytelling and even throw in a little bit of what I've been doing for the last 2 decades came about, it was sort of like, yeah, we should take it. We should, if this will help people, if this will make the experience of work better for people, then we should do it. So we came up with the idea of this new book in late May. We signed a contract in June. I wrote it during the summer. I had 8 weeks to write it, and we released it about a month ago now. And so it's been a massive haul. But that was sort of the grand experiment. And the hardest part about it, to be candid with you, was teaching my publishing house how to work remotely, right? Because they were all out of their offices too.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And what about the speed? I mean, what about the speed to market? Because I mean, I know that when I worked with Wiley over my first 4 books, it was like no matter what, it was a 6-month process, period from the time you handed in your manuscript to the time it came out. You clearly accelerated that big time.
Yeah, and this. So same with my publisher. So we've done 3 books together now, and each time it was about a 2-year long process. Usually I ask for that. I ask for a year to write it after we sign the contract, and I spend 6 months doing all the research. I agree with Seth Godin's now popularized phrase that there's no such thing as writer's block, because what I always felt was it's just a matter of research, right? If you are doing the research, then you should have something to write about. And so I would spend 6 months researching it, 6 months writing it, and then we do all of the editing and publishing, that sort of stuff. And we knew we had to get this out as fast as possible, right? So we were fortunate in that, again, it's very similar. It's about teams. I've been writing about teams and organizational life. And I wrote a book in 2016 called Under New Management. It's the red one. And that featured a number of different companies that had gone hybrid or had gone full on remote. And so there were companies that I could sort of circle back with and do interviews with again and that sort of thing. So that really helped the speed. But to be honest with you, it was one of those things, sit down and grind. And you said it jokingly, where else am I going to go? That was kind of all of our realities, right? So that was the focus from June and July. People would ask me in September, hey, how was your summer? And I'd say, I don't know. It happened. I don't remember any of it because I was locked in this room writing it the whole time.
But you clearly were inspired. I've always said it's kind of like I know this a little bit more. Hopefully, no one's about to eat right now. But for me, it's like verbal diarrhea. It's just when I know that it's flowing, it flows. It's like a fire hose of words that come out, as opposed to the equivalent of writer's block, where you're sitting and thinking and trying to force something out. So I sometimes talk about, there's authentic voice, but there's also authentic place.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a time, it can be a place, it can be a space, but it's a moment when everything comes together where you say, I just want to write and I don't want to stop until I basically pass out from scotch if you're Hemingway, or exhaustion if you're Berkus.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really careful in the writing process to set a number goal and stick to it. And often, like you said, because once things start sort of flowing, it's easy to keep the rhythm. But it's actually, to me, it's more important to stop. If the number is 1,500, to stop at 1,500. If the number is 2,000, right? In a normal book, the number is like 500 to 750, like it's a lot smaller. Because I find it's easier to get into the flow the next day, right? So if you have 2,000 words of inspiration and you deliberately stop at 500 words, you know exactly where you're going to pick up the next day, and so that becomes a whole lot easier. But the other key, really, to me at least, is finding great case studies, great stories, right? Like I look for stuff that's either a story about a famous company brand person that you've never heard, or a story about somebody that's so crazy it should be famous, right? And when you only capture and decide you're going to profile those stories, it's really fun to write about them, right? It's really fun to do the interviews. It's fun to do sort of all of it. So that helps a lot in creating that inspiration. The irony, of course, is that I came into this entire life thinking I was going to be a fiction writer where I had to make it all up myself. And in the end, I enjoy telling other people's stories way more.
I think maybe a good way to describe me would be a fictional nonfiction writer, or in terms of being able to create frameworks and structures and even abstract bridges between a case study and some kind of a rubric in a way. But I find that fascinating. Now, Dr. Burkus, because I've now decided to change. This is for your wife, Dr. David Burkus. Let's talk about teams, but let's start off by talking about pre-COVID. Before this happens, set up the situation. What was good, what was bad, and what was ugly about the way people interacted as groups, as teams in a somewhat professional environment.
Yeah. So, and I've been focused on this for a while. My very first book was about creativity and innovation, and probably the most famous sentence in the book, I say famous, it's not actually famous, it's just like the most highlighted on Kindle, is the phrase creativity is a team sport. I think the big kind of problem with a lot of people's approach to teams, and I think this applies in creative fields, especially like marketing, is we think it's individual talent driven, right? If we just assemble the team of the top talent, then we'll be fine, right? And nothing about the dynamics sort of matters, et cetera. And anybody who's played sports knows that if talent doesn't work hard to create that synergy with the rest of the team, talent falls apart, right? The saying in basketball, there's only one ball. So it doesn't matter how many star players are on the team, there's only one ball. And I think that's a big problem with how teams functioned. I think that they got to benefit a bit from being co-located all of the time because you could sort of smooth out frictions, right? There was the ability to pull someone aside into the hallway and apologize or confront them privately about something they said, et cetera, right? Like, I mean, that's the irony. You were talking about this in the soliloquy. There were quiet spaces, and then anybody could tap us in the shoulder, et cetera. We were talking about the open office being crazy distracting. Well, in a remote environment, everything is open because you have to be communicating in such a way that anybody can find it. So it makes it actually a lot harder to smooth those things out, right? So I would say that's a lot of the the strengths is it's not. I like the graphic. The strengths is that it's not about individual talent. It never actually was. It's about how much that talent is cohesive. The problem now is that remote work makes teamwork even more important, and it makes conflict even harder to resolve. And little things go unsaid for a really, really long time, and they can fester and they can get in the way of that exact synergy that we're looking for. And that's where we are. And anybody who's been working remotely for the better part of the last year probably has their own story of a time they were misinterpreted or a time they misinterpreted somebody else. And it took 2 or 3 weeks for that to get resolved. Whereas before it would have gotten resolved, by the end of that day.
So I found normally I come up, if you've seen the show, I come up with a quote, which is, stump the guest as in who said this. And I'll get to that. But I found another quote and I wasn't quite sure if I understood it. And so I wanted to ask you what you thought of it, but it almost seems like a perfect a segue, or not even segue, but just something that, it seems like a good time to mention it. It's from Mark Sanborn, and he said, in teamwork, silence isn't golden, it's deadly. And the reason why I didn't know if I understood it is I didn't know whether deadly meant deadly good or deadly bad. But maybe we can try and look at this or deconstruct it both ways.
Yeah, so I would be on the side of saying it's deadly bad, right? Because communication has always been the lifeblood of any relationship, right? And a team dynamic is no different. And so if you're not communicating, that can signal a lot of bad things. I talked about it in first book, In the Midst of Creativity, that one of the worst things that can happen for a creative team is for there to be consensus, right? We think we're supposed to have consensus. Everybody's supposed to agree upon the most brilliant solution, et cetera. But if everybody's silent, only one of two things is happening. Either people are self-censoring because the team itself doesn't create enough psychological safety to get them to think that this is a place where I can express dissent, right? Or nobody's thinking broadly enough about the problem. We're too sort of intellectually homogenous, and so we're not actually going to fully explore the solution. So to me, I wouldn't say the act of silence is deadly, but it should be a warning signal, right? It should be one of my favorite things to ask when working with leaders around this issue of psychological safety is, when was the last time somebody disagreed with you publicly, right? Because if it was a couple days ago, that's good. 6 months ago, that's a bad sign, right? So silence, to me, I'd go with deadly bad, but it's really more a symptom of what the actual disease is, which is some breakdown in a sense of safety or breakdown in a sense of ability to express dissent or create positive friction on the team that leads to better solutions. Are you at the point where now you're going to argue the opposite?
No, not really argue the opposite, but I suppose the deadly, I would probably go with you as well. But what I've learned, in this space, in this virtual environment, is that when there is a pause or a moment of silence, often we feel so uncomfortable with it. So it's very contextual, my answer. We feel so uncomfortable that we feel we've got to say something. And what I've learned is that sometimes that silence, that pregnant pause, can be quite beautiful in terms of just creating peace and a place for introspection and thought, as opposed to, this insecurity that I've got to keep talking. Otherwise, I'm showing a weakness, if you will.
Yeah. I could see that. I could definitely see that. I don't know if you've ever been involved in an intervention, right? Confronting somebody about their negative behavior or addiction or something like that. But the most effective tool there is usually silence, right? It's not the stories from family members and that sort of thing. It's when all of that's over and you just sort of leave the person to sit in what it is, right? And it's the same as negotiation. You know, there's the whole idea of in any negotiation, there's a period of silence, and the person who speaks first usually loses, right? So, I could see it going in a lot of different ways. I do think, I think this is less applying to teams where we're trying to problem solve, et cetera, that when silence is positive. I do think there's something to be said for silence among when you get along with people and you're comfortable just being in their presence without having to say anything. But I don't think that's what Mark's referring to here. I think it's more sort of referring to how well the team is actually collaborating. If there are long periods of silence, they probably aren't.
Well, I've got to say, first of all, thank you to Anne Bowman, who's definitely the best commenter now, because she's I don't need to take notes anymore because I've got creativity as a team sport. David Burkus, of course, removing friction, biggest challenge companies face that are stuck. And then Tom Morris is definitely one or the other is going to be victorious. In teamwork, communication is crucial. Communication is the lifeblood of any relation. We've got basically our transcript here. When is the last time somebody disagreed with you in public? When actually is the last time someone disagreed with you in public, David?
Well, I'm married and we both have doctor in front of our names. So we both have very strong opinions about things and are not afraid of disagreeing with each other.
That's disagreeing with you in private. I said
no, not always.
Oh, wait a second. I think we've got a comment coming in from a Dr. Mrs. Berkus. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Well, this is the actual quote that I did find for you today. Okay. And this is the first time, by the way, that the person talking about search engine marketing, right? It's the first time when I actually Googled the person's name, I actually still do not know who this person is. Maybe you know. But it said, it doesn't take strength to win. It takes the true heart of the team to win. It's a good quote, I suppose, but I have no idea who Emily Voiles is. Do you know who that is?
I don't either.
Emily,
I feel bad.
Thank you for a profound, or maybe in a not profound quote, but it doesn't take strength to win. It takes the true heart of a team to win. How does a team show heart on a Zoom?
I could give you a couple suggestions, but I think they'd be a bit like what your upcoming Clubhouse is going to be like. No, I'm kidding. So when we look at virtual teams, and this is broader than just Zoom, when we look at the cultures of virtual teams, ones that succeed compared to the other, they really have two things in common in the research. And these are not my terms. These come from Martine Haas and Mark Mortensen, two brilliant professors and researchers that studied BC, before Corona, studied virtual teams, cross-functional teams in a global company. And they found that the teams that showed heart, in this case, or the teams that really succeeded in a virtual environment, had two things in common, what they called shared understanding and shared identity. And I think of these as the 2020 problem and the 2021 problem. Shared understanding means, do I understand the knowledge, skills, abilities of the team? Do I understand whose strengths and what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are? Do I understand, and this was big in 2020, do I understand the context that they're working in, right? I'm lucky enough to be streaming at you from a 10 by 10 room in the basement of my house. My kids are home from school today because it's a snow day, but they are 2 floors above me playing their Nintendo Switch. I'm not going to be interrupted, right? Other people are bought a folding screen at Lowe's in March, pulled it across the corner of their dining room table to hide themselves from their 2 kids who are on Zoom school classes on the other end of the dining room table. Understanding the difference in context among the people in your team is going to have a massive effect on how you communicate, how you collaborate, even little things like how long you wait for a reply to an email because you understand the context that they're working in. So that's shared understanding. Shared identity, I think, is the 2021 problem as people start to trickle back to the office, because it's the level to which, even though I'm working alone, I feel like I'm part of a team. You mentioned this in the soliloquy, right? That it's become these sort of teams of one. And that's most team leaders' experiences in this last year has been, I don't manage a team of 12, I manage 12 individual relationships. But as we start to trickle back to the office, you're going to start to see an us versus them creep in between the co-locateds and the people who don't feel comfortable coming back now. Or, this is my big prediction, the people who never want to come back, or at least never come back all of the time because they like the flexibility and the way that they built their workspace. So making sure that we continue to feel like a team, we continue to understand how each other's work, the deliverables that we're producing, fit into the larger whole. all of those things matter as well. I would not to read into Emily Voil's thoughts. I would think that would be how I would define heart on a team, at least in a knowledge work team, is did we take the time to develop shared understanding and shared identity?
Emily Voyle might be actually a chatbot. We don't know. Maybe an AI bot. We haven't been able to track her down. But what a wonderful response, David. I mean, this idea of a shared understanding, shared identity, and creating the bridge from 20 to 21. There's probably under the bridge, it's not a troll, but under that bridge is the word empathy. Maybe the water flowing through underneath the bridge is empathy. We've heard that word a lot. What role does empathy play in terms of this journey from understanding to and through identity?
Yeah, well, I think it's a crucial piece of that shared understanding piece, right? That if I don't take the time to empathize for what other coworkers are going through, then I might have different expectations of them, right? So that's on the small scale, right? But I also, again, we're trying to keep everything coordinated. Everybody's got a different work schedule. I mean, I see the most thriving virtual teams show empathy even in the way they schedule meetings, for example. Like they do things like what some people call share the pain, which is realize that they may be in different time zones now because we've been at this for almost a year. But even if they're not, everybody's got different work schedules. And so what used to be our Monday 11 a.m. all hands meeting needs to be rotated around a bit so that it's equally inconvenient for people, right? Because when you're doing it at the time that's always convenient for you as the leader and is actually inconvenient for half of your team, you're sending the message that your schedule is more important than their schedule. That's not a very empathetic approach, right? So share the pain means, look, there is no great time for everyone. So we're just going to rotate through the burden, and I'll be on super early in the morning one day and another day so that it can be a great time for you. And another day we'll switch, right? So little things like that on a team make a huge difference over time in building that sense of shared understanding. And that does contribute to the identity thing, because you're not going to be able to build bonds with people if you're sending subtle signals that you think you're better than them. That's like friendship rule number one, right?
Your book has a series of these stories, case studies, practical advice and tips. I love what you just shared with us, because, you know, it makes me think of what one of my first bosses once said, which is the smallest things or the cheapest things are the most valuable things. This idea of just thinking about how we schedule meetings. I mean, I've heard a lot. You know, you can imagine talking to 204 people, you hear a lot of different perspectives. But this one thing about like non-traditional meetings, like 13-minute meetings or 25-minute meetings, that why does, I mean, Martin Lindstrom, I know you sat down with him as well. Martin Lindstrom said, why does a meeting always have to be an hour or 30 minutes? Like, why can't it be 11 minutes? No one's questioning the actual construct of meetings. But then it hit me and it dawned on me, why wouldn't you schedule a meeting on a Saturday or a Sunday if, in fact, it made sense for the people, for your employees or your team members that didn't have to actually contend with school and Zooms, etc. It's such a small idea, and yet it's a huge idea.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree. I mean, even in that context, as we start to come out of this and we start thinking about virtual teams in a global context, you know, I'm sure you've been in this boat. Around 2016, 2017, I started to do a lot of work in the MENA region, right? Middle East and North Africa. And they have Friday and Saturday off. And most of my presentations that I have to do with them are on Sunday because they sort of start their week. If you're thinking about coordinating schedules, you actually only have 4 days out of 7 that work for everyone, unless you're willing to have that empathy and go, yeah, if you would prefer to do it on what's the beginning of your week, well, then we'll do that time some of the time, right? And obviously there's all sorts of cultural or religious considerations in here, but the point is we need to make those considerations. We don't just need to assume that I'm the boss, I'm in charge, and so we're going to do it at the time that's convenient for us. And there's a larger point in what you said, which is that the book is, I call it a choose your own dilemma book, because it's written in a bunch of different stages of a life cycle, the life cycle of a remote team. And so whichever one you want to pick, right, whichever dilemma you're facing, almost none of them are like tech solutions. And that's the thing that's driven me nuts over the last year, is we're like, oh, well, we need to collaborate better on a team. What's the perfect project management software? And I'm sitting here over here being, as the psychologist, being like, well, time out. Do you have a sense of shared understanding? Do you have a sense of team identity? Do you have a sense of psychological safety? Because I know massive, fully remote companies that manage the entire thing from Google spreadsheets, right? You don't need a massive tech solution. What you need is to understand the human dynamic solution. And then maybe we'll figure out what the tech solutions are. But if we don't start from that place of empathy, understanding, coordinating, and having those conversations, then the tool doesn't matter at all.
I want to just talk about one aspect of our lives at the moment, and then we'll kind of segue into where you see all of this heading. I still feel, my sense is that even though people have spoken about the kids in the background and the dog barking and all of this, this life, just all of the mess that is life, I still don't feel that corporate hierarchy smiles on it. I still feel like there's an embarrassment, a sheepishness from the underling. When the kid is crying, there are apologies. Why are we still apologizing? It just infuriates me that you're still seeing this sense of weakness in these situations that are so out of our control.
Yeah, no, it's a holdover from from stigmas that have been going on for a long time, right? So before the pandemic, one of the most, I think I wrote about it in 2018 was when it came out, but one of the most influential studies around flex time and remote work time, not full on remote work, but the ability to work from home 2 or 3 days a week, showed that that every senior leader was giving praise to their flex time, but most of them had a subtle bias against it, meaning there was a stigma attached to it. The assumption is that you need flex time because you can't manage your household, right? Or that you need flex time because there's something going on in your life that's distracting you from work. Nobody ever actually assumed, and actually there was a gender bias here too, which is extra infuriating, but very few people assumed that you're asking for Tuesdays and Thursdays to work from home because that's when you do the deep work that creates more value and you'd like to be undistracted, right? That's not the assumption. The assumption is you can't keep your life in order and it's spilling over and affect your work. And unfortunately, that stigma turned into the Zoom call, right? And so now we have people doing the virtual background because they want to hide the rest of their life in the background. And ironically, when I work with remote teams, one of the first things I ask everybody to do is grab your webcam, pick it up, and show me where you're working, right? Give me a virtual tour of your office because I want that sense of shared understanding around the context. Show me what you're working with. Show me what you have. And especially for a team leader, that's huge because you might find out that you need to be the one that actually helps them get set up in that regard, that your technological abilities are not uniform, or at the very least that like when we get out of this in a year and still 25 to 40% of the workforce wants to work remotely, that virtual tour might show that, you need to fight for a co-working space for that person because they're not going to come back to the office, but they do need somewhere to go a couple times a week to be focused. You don't know that if you don't ask what's going on, and you won't find out if people are still embarrassed to show you what's going on in their house.
What a great point. And that's why I feel like I am going to reveal what my real background looks like right now. I've been doing this from a wine cellar. And actually, I've been doing this while camping. And I'm actually in a bunker, of course. I'm in a bunker.
Because why wouldn't you be? Yeah.
We have a press briefing. This is actually where I am right now. This is about as naked as I can be if I was not on Clubhouse. I think you prefer my actual Zoom background today, don't you?
But I'm biased. I'll tell you, I'm not. There was some data on this before the pandemic that people actually weren't big fans of virtual backgrounds. They'd rather see what you're working. And some of that is the tech, but some of it is the sort of lack of humanness. I have seen, for what it's worth, I have seen one virtual team use virtual backgrounds in a way I thought was really, really cool, which is they hired a designer on, Fiverr or something like that. And they designed 6 virtual backgrounds with each of the 6 core values of the company. And what you were supposed to do before the company all hands meeting is sit and reflect, which core value do you want to really focus on during this meeting? And then you come on and everyone has the Zoom background that they chose, that, today I choose to be bold, or today I choose to be empathetic, or
love it.
So I've seen that use, and I'm a big fan of that use. But in a variety of the other contexts, unless you are stacking up copies of my own book as your virtual background, I'm not actually the biggest fan of virtual backgrounds.
But and it's funny because on the show we've actually had a really nice meme with Room Raider. Actually, Room Raider is the new Zoom background. Where let's look at yours. I mean, yours is great. It's kind of it's kind of blurred out a little bit because you're in focus. But you know,
sorry, if I step aside, you can get a much better look at it all. Did that help? Did that help?
Looks like a belt there. Is that a Jiu Jitsu belt?
There are actually 4 belts in the background. So I won these 2 in competitions when I was younger. And then this one, let me see if I can point it. That is actually the famous winged eagle from WWE. I don't know if you can get focused on that. Hulk Hogan, Bret the Hitman Hart, etc., all won it. And I was a big fan of that when I was a kid until this organization, Pancrase, showed up in Japan, which was a hybrid wrestling organization. It was the first MMA organization. So the 2 down there are collectors because I don't know, I just like big gold shiny things. But the 2 up there, I actually did win in jiu-jitsu competitions.
I love that. Well, again, I'm going to keep on calling you Dr. Sir Master Berkus. Before we actually get to kind of the moving forward part and specifically some things that you want people to take away from this book, maybe something that you're proudest of in this book, you mentioned a gender bias, and I would think that from a diversity standpoint, there are a lot of other biases that exist as well. And this is something that I felt kind of fiercely passionate about, which is, do companies have an obligation, a moral obligation, to make sure that their employees in this remote environment are set up with better cameras, better speakers, better lighting, soundproofing, making sure that they are at least broadcasting or sharing or Zooming from a level playing field?
So that's an interesting question because you use the phrase moral obligation, right? And so I'm always tempted to say, I honestly think we overemphasize what things are certain moral obligations. I mean, I can tell you this. If you want to actually, I'll screw the moral obligation. I'll make the capitalist case for it. You hired these people because of their knowledge, skills, and abilities and their ability to use that to generate value for your organization. And if you're not giving them those tools to help them collaborate, and that doesn't mean a DSLR camera like what I've got or fancy ability to do virtual background, but if there is an unlevel playing field, you're losing money, right? So moral obligation, yeah, sure. But let's make the totally immoral capitalist case for it. You are not getting the highest return on your money if you're allowing people to work remotely in a compromised environment. If you want to get the highest return on that salary, then you might as well spend a little bit more on making sure that there's that level playing field. And by the way, depending on how you're going to operate beyond 2021, you're going to be saving a lot of money on real estate, I'm going to bet. And so you might as well reinvest some of that into things like this. I will say, that's a big, giant, that's sort of a C-suite problem. At the team leader level, my recommendation to a lot of people to help fight that is, okay, if you can get a handle on tech, if you don't have a decent webcam, I got a C920 you can borrow. Just let me know where to mail it, right? And I'll send it off to you. But from a team leadership perspective, I'm looking forward towards the end of this year when some people are back at the office and others are not. And my big fear actually has nothing to do with tech. My big fear is that we'll call meetings and 4 people will be in a conference room together and 3 people will be coming in individually. And that's a really unlevel playing field as well. And so I'm a big fan of like a company like Basecamp that actually has a rule that if one person can't make it to the meeting is now a virtual meeting. That way everyone has the same box in the Brady Bunch grid of faces, and there actually is that level playing field. So I think it's worth thinking about from a team level as well. And I've always loved that idea of like all or nothing, right? Either everybody can get in the room at the same time or they can't. And let's make sure that we all have that level playing field before we get into that meeting.
Bill Maher, has his segment on his show called New Rules. And it seems like organizations are going to need to have new rules, or at least rules about how we engage. I think that Basecamp example is terrific. I want to make sure that in the last 2 or 3 minutes that you can share with people watching what you want them to take away from this book, thinking about not just, this is so... You clearly know your shit when it comes to this stuff, I got to say. I mean, and the fact that you've, from an organizational standpoint, as an organizational psychologist, having studied these, it seemed like you were the right man for, or the right person at the right time to write the right book. What do you want people to take away from this, and maybe something that to you feels closest to home in terms of, that you're proudest of in this book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the big idea, I don't even remember what our original title for the book was, but we settled on Leading from Anywhere because about midway through last year, it became obvious that we're spending way too much time in the wrong debate, right? Even today, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, maybe it was yesterday, the days all run together, you know how that is, about how we're leaving people in limbo because now reopening offices might go all the way till September or October. And it's a debate about the wrong question. The question is not work from the office or work from home. The future of work is working from anywhere. That's why the book's called Leading from Anywhere, right? And so if that's what you're asking, what's our reopening plan? How do we get everybody back? You're asking the wrong question. The question is, how can we create a culture of trust and autonomy so that people want to come to the office when they need to and they feel welcome, but they don't feel obligated and they can work from somewhere else where they choose it's more efficient as well. There's a number of companies I profile in the book that deliberately became remote companies. And there are others, remote organizations, that became remote organizations because they chose to lead from a place of trust and giving their people autonomy and a say over where they worked. And it just so happened that they turned into remote organizations as well. And so I'd much prefer people think about that. It isn't how do we get our people back to the office? Some of them are not coming back. It is how do we give our people enough trust and autonomy to decide where they do their best work and then help them find those spaces.
Well said. And Dave Delaney is waving hello, proving that nice guys finish first. And Anne says, I like the way your brain works and you support it with data and experience. Steve Garfield needs to know, where is that comment? He needs to know what camera you're using. So you might be now having two DMs with him. One is the secret account and your camera. Yeah. Just send me. It's a Sony A6400. Anything from that A line is great. The real trick is finding the right lens. And I don't even know that I'm satisfied with this one because you can actually see more of my room than you might like. My old camera stopped right at the bookshelves and everyone thought it was actually a virtual background. So I'll tell you something that I've seen a lot of people, by the way, go through this period with DSLR cameras, and most of them, their audio is actually not synced with the video, and yours is synced perfectly. It's because you're Dr. David Burkus, best-selling author, keynote speaker, runner of secret hamburger accounts, Jiu Jitsu master, sir. You can find out more about how to work with David and how he works with companies just like yours at davidburkus.com. You can follow him on the Twitter, on the Insta. You can connect with him with LinkedIn. And as we were saying, there needs to be a better way to share and at LinkedIn. And of course, the book is called Leading from Anywhere, not work, not home, not hybrid, anywhere. The Essential Guide to Managing Remote Teams. You have a link in your comments. We have only one more thing until we take off all our clothes and go into Clubhouse, but we're actually going to be on Zoom as well, so we won't do that. The Corona question, I think I know the answer. It's this book, but what's the single best idea you've ever come up with in your life?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that the working from anywhere idea was actually mine, right? I do feel like I might have realized it sooner than most people. I feel like a lot of senior leaders still hold on to this abandoned faith that we're going to get back to normal as soon as everyone's vaccinated or whatever. But the realization, I would call it for this book, the grand realization that I know is mine is just the reality. You don't send 100 million people to work from home for a year and then snap your fingers and ask them to come back. It doesn't happen. And whatever I can do to get that idea into more people's heads is what I've been focused on for the last several months and will continue to focus on for years.
Well, David, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is one of those conversations where I just knew coming into it that I didn't need to plan. And I knew I didn't even have time for the most part because of the earlier commitment. But what a free, flowing, natural, profound, useful, relevant conversation. You can come back anytime. And the only reason is because he is not a master black belt jiu-jitsu master. He is actually above that. It's Chuck Norris who has this to say about you.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Let's go to Clubhouse.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV After Show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at coronatv.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.